CDPR on their most recent stream showed off 10 new cards which are meant for the new arena mode or draft mode that is coming to Gwent on February 28th. So I wanted to take a look at them. First we have Ichwaraquax. So a very rudimentary search on Google reveals that Ichwaraquax was a pure unicorn that helped Ciri, or at least accompanied Ciri, on her adventures. Well, the art of this card is actually quite beautiful. If they're looking at the original illustration, it does have better proportions, or at least is the composition works better than the way it's cropped here. But I mean, whoever integrated this artwork into the card effectively, I suppose, did crop it effectively, because this unicorn, the horn of the unicorn touches the border of the card, and then you have relatively a lot of space between the actual horse body and whatever is happening with this vortex here. So I would say it's rather effective. I would say it's very much influenced by Baroque art, specifically what you generally call an X composition. So with Baroque, which is, or at least Italian Baroque specifically, I mean, this does reference in some ways Caravaggio, I would say, and this concept of tenebrism, which is depicting the extreme play of light and shadow. Here we have, and of course the X composition, because when Baroque art, one of the sort of stylistic or formal qualities of Baroque art is often said to be the X composition, meaning that when the artist essentially foreshortens the whatever figure, or in this case the unicorn, that he's trying to depict in space, right? And if you would draw a line, right, from the back of the horse to the front, it would form a line, right, where the rest of the composition would generally form another line, thereby making it an X composition. So again, we see that this is very much influenced by the Baroque and the sense of foreshortening and tenebrism, for which Caravaggio was rather famous for, the Italian painter who spent most of his career working in Rome. And most of his paintings are actually still in situ in Rome, in chapels or churches, because they were usually meant as altar pieces for specific chapels in Rome specifically. So they don't often actually travel. It's rather hard to see a Caravaggio outside of Italy. So this is very much influenced by the sort of Baroque art, specifically the care to show this horse as naturalistic as possible, right? To sort of model all these sinews and muscles, right, which are specifically accentuated by this light source. And the single light source that creates a stark play of shadow and light on the form of the unicorn is specifically what tenebrism, right, or shadow, because tenebroso is shadow. That specific effect of tenebrism, which is so quintessentially Baroque and so important to the work of Caravaggio, is really used here effectively. So I really like this card for its art. Obviously, in terms of how the card actually works in the game, I would say, well, with Stefan Skellen, and constructed at least with Stefan Skellen, it would appear, if it can in fact be used with Stefan Skellen, it could potentially be a strong combo because you play stuff on Skellen, you put this on top of the deck. When it of course is boosted by 5, so when you actually play, when you take it out of your deck and play it, then it wounds itself, but again, by wounding itself, it becomes its base power again, so technically, at least according to, if I'm reading this correctly, if it wouldn't bug out, if the way the algorithm's set up to check for specific things in the way I'm thinking they are set up, then it would actually work, because the Equiraquax would be boosted by 5. Now, if you draw it from your deck and then play it, it of course wounds itself. Then the game checks what the base power is, finds automatically that the base power is its original base power of 7, and then it would deal the 7 damage to 300. So potentially it's a 28-point play, which is rather a huge tempo swing. I mean, I don't think in most situations you would get 28 because you need 3 targets of more than 7. But obviously against Skelga Swordsman or Skelga Wounding deck, you would definitely, an engine deck, you could potentially have that. And so, but that's in constructed, and this is meant to be an arena card, so perhaps an arena card you played with a lot of units that boost, and when that current power goes up, then this activates. So it's a combo of several cards rather than just a combo of Stefan Skellen. Alright, let's see. Dandelion Vainglory. This is a Dandelion portrait. I believe it is actually an artwork or a portrait that you could own in the game. I think it's in Blood and Wine, maybe? Again, I'm not completely familiar with The Witcher or its lore. I mean, it does seem like it would be a representation that Dandelion himself might commission, because it shows him in this weirdly heroic pose, this huge sword, having slain a monster. So it almost seems like he's a witcher, right? Very... Again, rather... This actually reminds me more of a Renaissance painting. And I'm not actually sure what the artist was specifically thinking, but this billowing cape, the colors actually, this blue and red, those speak to the types of colors that were often used in the Italian Renaissance, and of course the very sort of regularity in the composition. Right? We don't have that sort of dramatic foreshortened X composition that we had with the Equiraquax. And it's very well divided into sort of segments of 3. It's asymmetrical, which does create some sort of visual interest, and it's very particular geometries. This is a sort of a 1 to 3. Or almost sort of a golden, you could say that this is close to a sort of golden mean split between this side and this side. And if we were to add the length of this portion of the side to this portion of the side, it would be in a very specific... This side would be... in a very specific proportion, right? The longer, this longer segment of the side would be in a specific proportion with the entire side, right? So that's sort of the golden mean. It's a proportion between the smaller segment and the larger segment of the side to the proportion of the larger segment to the entire side, or A plus B if this is segment A and this is segment B. So again, very specific geometries that are thought to be pleasing to the human eye in some way. again, you have a sort of a cross again. Not an X composition that relies on foreshortening and not lines that recede in space, but lines that really move almost as across the surface of the actual artwork. So a very stable composition, even though we have this sort of asymmetry between the Dandelion figure and this outcropping that he's standing on with this monster being slain. So, the card, of course, in terms of how it's actually used or how it functions in the game, boosts self by 3 for each Geralt, Yennefer, Tristan's Zoltan card in your starting deck. So this is an effective arena card because often these are powerful golds that you might want to draw, or if given the choice of the 4, as we're told arena actually works, then you will most likely draw something like Geralt Igni or Yennefer Conjurer or Triss Butterfly Spell or some Triss variant that would actually work for your deck, and then by collecting this team, right, because that's sort of what it refers to, is these characters actually working together, right, in the story of The Witcher. By collecting this team, you get power, you get 3 for each. So you get 12 potentially. Alright. Now let's see. Let's see now. Alright, so this is the card that everyone has apparently a problem with on Reddit. I don't know, I guess thinking about using it in Constructed. This is a 5 power gold. This is Vern, of course, and this is Vern merciless. So we see him, I suppose, in the midst of wounding someone or really murdering someone. It's sort of a grim image, isn't it? And he, again, we kind of see an X composition, right? Because we see this person foreshortened, and then there's a line. Again, the background sort of is at a different angle, and here we see this very clear line of the composition, even being sort of stretched out by this element here. So again, we have a very dynamic X composition, something that Baroque was very well known for. This person's foreshortened space, so it makes us think, or it creates this effect of action happening, even though it's a still image. Yeah, this type of representation is rather common in the game. These sort of scenes of hyper-violence. I don't know if I'm necessarily a huge fan of that aspect of the game or its art. I mean, it's definitely placed in stark contrast if you compare it to something like Hearthstone, which is also, of course, in the fantasy universe, but it's in the fantasy universe of World of Warcraft, which has a lighter art style. I mean, obviously, a lot of the cards have various art styles. It doesn't necessarily conform completely to that. Samwise, the main artistic director of Blizzard for a long time, doesn't necessarily conform to his specific style as much as World of Warcraft does, for example. But they tend to be more lighthearted. These seem to be going for very sort of gritty sort of social realist. This is what representation of war. This is a more socialist, realist representation of war. This is what people actually go for, right? More akin to representing war in along the lines of someone like Goya in his war series, right? In a very naturalistic way, less so than, let's say, the post-war World War I German expressionists. But I don't know. I don't know if I love it, honestly, because it's kind of, I don't know if these sort of social realist representations of war is essentially what we really need in this day and age, or we really need in a fantasy game, but it's what it is. In terms of its power, destroy a face-down ambush unit and draw a card. Yeah, this is what people are upset about, the fact that it essentially only works with one situation. It's a gold card. Because it could be a decent silver. I mean, I feel like there is need for a card that actually destroys ambush units. Especially since Goital, again, does actually play, at least in the most current meta, does actually play the ambushes, whether it's bronze or silver ambushes, and this doesn't really specify. I mean, it actually just destroys an ambush card. So, and then drawing card is actually a good mechanic, but I could see that this is not as effective for a gold. But maybe in Arena it will see more play, and in Arena it's maybe worth more. Since Arena is more meme or RNG, or that you see more RNG in Arena, and people are more likely to even play ambush in any deck, because obviously what's unique about the Gwent Arena apparently is that you don't pick a class. Unlike Hearthstone, you don't pick a class, you don't pick a faction, you don't pick a leader. I mean, you pick a leader, but you can essentially mix and match cards from various factions, which of course you can't do in something like Hearthstone Arena, where you're in Hearthstone Arena, you're given essentially a choice of 3 classes, and if you pick a class, a mage, for example, then you are, of course, you have to stick to the cards of that class. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm more on the modernist side when it comes to representations of war and sort of tragedy or trauma in art, specifically following World War II and the Holocaust. I mean, it was Theodore Adorno that said that there could be no more lyrical poetry after Auschwitz, right, referring to the concentration camp. And most people misquote that as saying there can be no poetry after Auschwitz, and of course he meant really lyrical poetry, right? So poetry that sort of expresses the emotion, and I think you could extrapolate that to really mean any sort of lyrical art, right? So sort of any art that really is descriptive or is social realist, right? That tries to describe such horrible situations as the Holocaust by really referring to the or representing it in a sort of realistic manner, right? In this sort of descriptive manner, whether it's sort of this type of naturalism, right, that we see in artwork or in poetry or in prose, sort of long descriptions of what actually happened, right? I mean, obviously, Adorno was favored modernist expression in art. I mean, he does this in I believe, a West German journal. After the war, he actually makes a statement I can't quite remember, but he's obviously very very well known and important from the early 20th centuries as a scholar in what was called the Frankfurt School, this sort of Institute for Social Research, when this sort of united anthropologists and this early philosophers, obviously, because Adorno was really a philosopher, and people who were sort of creating the discipline that we know as sociology today. And of course, Adorno with Max Horkheimer and Hannah Arendt and a few others actually escaped Nazi Germany, right? Because this was in the city of Frankfurt, escaped the city of Germany and began work in America and American academia, so that's what they're known for. And of course, wrote after the war, continued the work after the war. Specifically, a lot of their work showed up in West German, or specifically Adorno's work showed up in West German journals. These aesthetic debates of the post-war period, Adorno really stood on the side of sort of modernist expression, or if we could really think of one modernist technique that would be relevant here, was defamiliarization, right? So making, whether in drama, in prose, or in visual art, this attempt to actually make the object look or appear less familiar, right? To show a perspective on it that sort of was critical in that sense, that would change one's perspective. That wouldn't offer a perspective that we are sort of used to or is conventional, such as we see here. It was a man murdering another man, right? With this blood represented on the blade, right? Very, very conventional. This is what we think of when we think of as war, this encampment burning in the background, right? But the idea of defamiliarization was to show another side of it in order to sort of make one think critically about what was happening. And in these sort of aesthetic debates, that sort of split a lot of intellectuals on either side of the Iron Curtain, right? And the sort of real socialist Eastern Bloc and the sort of democratic capitalist world that split along these sort of lines, where the Eastern Bloc intellectuals often argued for sort of social realist representations of this kind of naturalistic representation that was argued often to be understandable to a lot of people, and then the people like Adorno on the Western side of the wall arguing that no, you need this type of modernist techniques like defamiliarization. So those are my thoughts on when I see these kind of cards that represent, in this sort of social realist way, in this very naturalistic way, depict war specifically, right, or some sort of tragedy or trauma. All right, what's next? Yennefer, another Yennefer card. Yennefer Necromancer. Now, I am not a huge fan of this artwork. Of course, I have to, and you, dear viewer, have to keep in mind that this is a screenshot, right, of the stream, or a screenshot of the developers presenting this, right, in the stream from their account. So this is not going to be as clear as seeing the card actually in play, running within the engine of the game, or even if you looked at the artwork separately as just the artwork itself. And I do recommend that to everyone, is to actually look at the artwork itself, not just within the context of the game engine, not just with the context of these sort of nice borders that mark these things as cards, but to actually look at the artwork that was created by people like Lorenzo Mastriani or Nemanja Stankovic or Diego de Alameda. I mean, you can basically check out all of their ArtStation or probably DeviantArt accounts. Maybe at one point, as we had sort of on and off, the attributions or the credits will show back in the game again, so it'll be easier to say, okay, this was drawn by this person, and I can Google their name. And obviously an ArtStation or a DeviantArt, for those of you who don't know, these are essentially portfolio sites that let artists and illustrators and photographers actually to show off their work, right, to an audience. It's essentially like, yeah, they're portfolio sites. So back in the day, you would take your portfolio and show it to clients. There would be a physical portfolio where you show your physical works of art, right? Now you can obviously, as with most things, you can do digitally. But then you can also create a wider audience, right? Because you can show it to other people. So I would definitely suggest that for those of you listening to actually check out the Gwent illustrators. But yeah, I am not a huge fan. I mean, this looks very much like a sort of VFX, After Effects sort of added effect, which is not the best. I mean, which makes me think that almost the figure is modeled in some sort of 3D rendering program, but I doubt that it is. And of course, I'm sure that's part of it, right? Thus, again, we see this figure from a little bit low vantage angle. And we can see that because we see the bottom portion of this arch right here, and the Yennefer is casting some sort of spell. And obviously, the artist effectively uses this framing device of, I know it looks like a root or something. I don't think it's a hand or anything really related to raising the dead, as the necromancer would suggest. But yeah, what does it do? It is a 5 power. It's a gold. It's a Nilfgaard gold. Resurrect a bronze or silver soldier from your opponent's graveyard. Alright, so it essentially acts like a caretaker, but a caretaker for Nilfgaard, and obviously really, really powerful with in mirror matches, just as caretaker tends to be against monsters. So I feel like this could be a decent card in both Constructed and Arena. And unless they will lock these cards only to Arena, I don't think any card game really does that, but they could. Yeah, this is, and of course it's more powerful I think than Caretaker. Actually, I'm not really sure what power Caretaker is currently, so I would have to look that up. Oh, and we have a monster card, Imlerith Sabbath. This is again shown from a very sort of one could call a interesting or dynamic composition, right? So it's a 3-point perspective, again from a low vantage point. So 3-point meaning that if you use essentially a vanishing point to sort of map out where these characters and the forms that make up these figures lay, you'd use a 3-point perspective. So you essentially fix a vanishing point right here, and then sort of draw lines to plan out the rest, and then another vanishing point here, and another vanishing point probably, well, really like off to the side, probably off my screen, and then draw the figures according to that. So that's 3-point. That's why 3-point perspective, because you use sort of 3 vanishing points, which are points where you draw these sort of oblique lines, from which you draw these sort of oblique lines to then map out where parts of the compositions fall and how to actually draw this type of chair in space. Obviously, this isn't super regular. It isn't as regular as some people would use 3-point perspective, but that's obviously the basis of it. Yeah, so this is quite interesting and effective. And also, there's a really good rhythm created by the repetition, right? Because these are, I guess, succubi. So they look similar. They're these women with horns. So by repeating this form of this woman horns, even though they have different hair, this one I think is brunette or green. This one's obviously a redhead, or has red hair, but this repetition of form creates this sort of rhythm, right, that leads finally to Imlerith. So a very good composition, very interesting composition. It's an exciting card to see him play. A great card to really you look at or preview even when you're playing, I feel. What does it actually offer? So it's Imlerith, so it's another Imlerith card. I feel like Imlerith is one character that hasn't gotten a different card than his sort of standard visage, even though the Crones did, and this is the first Wild Hunt officer that gets another card, or a card specific to some contacts, with this colon. So Sabbath, so he's taking a load off his bow. And I suppose that the suggestion here is that he would be enjoying some R&R with the Succubi, I suppose. Duel the highest enemy on turn end. If this unit survives, heal it by 2 and give it 2 armor. So, alright. So it duels the highest enemy. If it survives, which is unlikely because it's a 5, it will heal. Not boost, heal. So let's say it loses 3, then it'll go back to a 4, but then it'll get 2 armor. So the armor will stack. Interesting. I don't think it will work well in constructed because it's too low to duel the highest enemies that are around. Like, it's a continuous ability, and yeah, it could provide some interesting Mimi RNG type of goodness in Arena. So we'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. And here we have Chris Telekinesis. Again, not a great dimension to actually work off. Again, I believe this is a screen cap from the live stream. Create a bronze special card from either player's starting deck. Again, this is like the 3rd or 4th Triss, the Temeria unit. Interesting composition. We see her from, again, a lower vantage point, rather farther away, right? She's apparently lifting these stones with her mind, right? It's telekinesis. Expending telekinetic or kinetic energy, right, with her mind. It's an interesting composition. I like the lighting. Again, very sort of tenebristic or baroque lighting, right, that uses a sort of single main light source. I guess really coming from above her head. Or unless this is some sort of feel. This is supposed to illustrate some sort of feel the force that's coming out of her, of her hand. But yeah, again, creating this very tenebristic effect of shadow and a stark contrast between shadow and light. I mean, we can even see here there's a little bit of transition, or yeah, there's a little bit of transition or gradation between light and dark, but it's rather very, very well lit area, a part of this volume of the stone, and essentially dark, right, with this sort of blue, which is sort of complementary to this. So it creates, again, not only does it create a contrast, not only does it create contrast between light and dark, but then sort of separates the composition, right? These complementary colors create the sense of depth and the sense of movement in the composition, right? By offering this sort of separation. So again, really cool illustration. Create a bronze special card from either player starting deck. This is nice if you're playing against someone that uses spells to be able to use their spells. Pretty good in Arena. I don't know about Constructed, but it would in some mirror matches. With Skellige using lots of spells or something like Alchemy, it could potentially see some play and actually have an advantage. Dandelion Poet. Again, a very interesting Dandelion image. I feel like Dandelion has a really interesting illustration. Because obviously, if we look at the narrative of this, he's effectively knocked someone out with, unless actually with the amount of blood. Well, they might have just broken their nose. Hopefully, he didn't kill him, but at least knocked him out with his lyre, right? Which the part of which he's he's holding to his chest right here. Yeah. Again. Next composition, right? Here we see a foreshortened Dandelion, right? A foreshortened figure because we're looking at it from a high vantage point. The other part of the X composition comes here. If we can sort of draw a line along this floor. So we have that, again, a rather Baroque, a Baroque composition. Also good separation between the foreground and the background, so background being rather well lit, right? So actually we lose a lot of the silhouette of this figure, the lines making up this figure. They merge with the floor in some way. And of course but with Dandelion standing more in the darkness, we actually see more of a solid silhouette, more of a solid line to the figure. Yeah, very effective, nice illustration. It's actually an interesting card to me. Draw a card and play a card. I feel that's a useful mechanic to have. I don't know if it's a useful mechanic for gold, since golds and Gwent are usually high power units. I mean, you have to sort of have 4 of them in the deck. Right, so those slots are rather valuable, and they usually have abilities that make your packages really work together, or have very valuable abilities, or even are really have high power value. Whether that's from something like Nova, which instantly becomes 25 power because a certain condition is met, or something that is a 9 power but then moons something for another value, which then makes it a 15 or a 20 power, right? Used effectively. So I like this mechanic, but I don't know if it's fit for a gold. Draw a card and play a card. Yeah, because it gives you a card draw, which is nice, and you have to play something. Sarah's Fearless, Clanacret Officer. This is a Skellige card. Nice genre scene. Sarah's with a horse and what looks to be inclement weather, if not a blizzard. I mean, it doesn't look as terrible for maybe a blizzard, but it's definitely dead of winter. Not when you want to be sad, unless the premium version went animated. Actually, shows a lot of snow, or there would be a lot of snow moving before the plane. Sort of in front of the plane of this illustration, right, and behind the border. So you sort of lose a little bit of sight of the actual figure. So maybe then you could sort of read it as a blizzard more. Resurrect the next unit you discard. Alright. So again, a gold. Resurrect the next unit you discard. Alright, so it works with Skellige mechanics. Probably a good arena card. I'm not complaining completely. Morin, skeletal card. Morin, Forest Child. Again, it is a gold. And it's an ambush unit. Really pretty illustration too. Again, rather symmetrical. Alright. So very, very symmetrical in some sense, right? This sort of segment, this part of the figure and this part of the figure is relatively equal to each other. So also rather centralized, so rather very, very stable. Obviously, you have these diagonal lines, which effectively represent light beams of light, or beams of light that are made visible because of their fog, because it looks like a swamp, and this point of interest. Right, these fairies or whatever vortex or whatever power is illustrated here. Right, this is the lower sort of third of the composition. So that way it creates visual interest, even though the figure, most of the composition is essentially very symmetrical. And the figure is largely centralized. Although, again, stretched across the entire length. So I suppose the figure is in these. If you split this canvas into 3, then it's in the 2/3. So there's a little bit of visual interest created there by that symmetry. So this is an ambush. When your opponent plays a bronze or silver special card, flip over and cancel its ability. Oh, so this is the spell essentially, right? I don't know if this is, again, a good legendary or gold or a good ability for a legendary gold card. It's a useful ability when it comes to ambush because it essentially works like the spell, like the Mage Seeker in Hearthstone, where someone plays a spell or a special card, really. So anything that's really anything that's a special card, so whether it's a hazard, it's a spell, whichever tag it has, right, but it's an event rather than a unit, then it is dispelled, right? It becomes null. So yeah, this is a really good mechanic actually that can work and constructed well because it denies or punishes the use of spells. So playing against something like Alchemy, Nilfgaard, right, might deny whatever Vicovaro is pulling, or might deny Weather from Eredin, right, in the Eredin Weather deck, or it's actually really good. I don't know if it's good for a gold card, although in the context of Arena, maybe I think you can have more gold cards than. I mean, I have to actually play Arena to see, but I think you can have more gold cards than the standard and constructed. So I suppose if you can have more gold slots, this is not as bad. But in constructed, I don't know if it's worth a gold slot. A silver would probably be worth it. Unless at least in a deck where you rely on punishing spells. And finally, Geralt Professional. Now, to me, this is an interesting composition. Again, this is Geralt, again, slaying some monster. Essentially what we see with Dandelion. This is more believable, right? Since Geralt is this badass monster hunter. But again, foreshortened, right? So you kind of see an X composition. Again, that creates visual interest, right? Because it creates the sense of movement, even in a still image. And of course, if you have a premium, I'm sure he's going to be stabbing at this thing. Whatever he's doing, it's kind of like Monster Hunter. I guess he wants to take its pelt or something. Very much looks like a Frank as a Frazetta illustration. If you don't know who Frank Frazetta is, I would encourage you to check him out. He is a illustrator that worked on a lot of covers for science fiction and fantasy novels. He's really famous for the covers for Conan the Barbarian. This is the sort of painterly. This looks like the sort of painterly style, and very much the colors combination. These type of desaturated, muted colors that he would use, especially in this. I mean, if you know what I mean by desaturated, meaning that these are not bright, sort of garish colors, right? They've been saturated. It's as if you add gray to this green. For example, I mean, that's one way to desaturate a color. If you're talking about color combinations or actually mixing paint together on a palette, you add gray to a certain color and then you can desaturate it that way. Also, another way, obviously, the more effective way to desaturate is to add a complementary color, so a red to a green. Obviously not too much, but a certain proportion will desaturate it. Even these eyes, these sort of glowing eyes, very much Frazetta-like. Yeah, I really love this card because it is obviously, I mean, obviously it's not completely, the artist is not completely copying Frazetta, but they're very influenced by Frazetta, or this is very much a homage to Frank Frazetta, which is I really enjoy, because Frazetta was one of the key sort of science fiction and fantasy illustrators who did a lot of covers for Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, and again, like I mentioned, Conan. These had these sort of burly, hulking, very sort of hyper masculine figures, and half naked sort of pin-up looking women. He was very much at the forefront of that style of cover illustration for science fiction and fantasy. So I do enjoy this homage very much. And of course, since Geralt is a monster hunter, this is Geralt being featured, right? So, and also since Frazetta was very much in the Conan illustrator, again, is sort of in a way an homage to Geralt, or connects Geralt to Conan, right? That Geralt is continues this tradition of these sort of male protagonists of fantasy. Not to say that Geralt is exactly like Conan, but he does share some similarities. So it's interesting that tradition is visually established when you sort of realize that this is an homage to Frank Frazetta. I mean, at least I would read it this way. So I love this card, actually. Now, in terms of actually playing it rather than just looking at it in the game engine or looking at it in preview as you play it, will you play it? Will people play it? That's another question. 7 power again, and if this is specifically meant to be an arena card, and the question is, will it be played in arena? Deal 4 damage to an enemy. If it's a monster, you can destroy it instead. Alright. So it can either give you a damage of 4, which is pretty average in terms of damage. It's not 1 or 2. It's 4. It's not something like 7. It's not like a Panther. Of course, a Panther is the skeletal unit where if you meet at least that specific condition, there is a specific condition of targeting a unit that is on a row that does not have more than 4 units, and you do actually get to deal 7 damage, which is quite a lot from a bronze, obviously, and this is a gold. Obviously, just like with Lambert, the real power of the card lies in this meeting this condition, which is that you are targeting a monster unit. In terms of flavor or the lore, it obviously makes sense. Just Geralt the Witcher, and he of course has a Witcher type. Geralt the Witcher is a monster hunter, and that is his profession. So that makes sense flavor wise, but I don't know if it's powerful enough. I mean, obviously in a fight against monsters, it's very powerful because you can destroy any monster unit. So it essentially fulfills the same, very similar role as Lambert, although Lambert doesn't really see play in this meta anymore because you run up against units that are engines, so they're boosted, and Lambert is really good at powerful units that are not boosted, so he's actually good against the Siri. He will destroy the Siri. But yeah, so conditional that probably won't see a lot of play, but again, in Arena, if you get this, it might be worth getting it as again, if there are more gold slots than are in constructed, then this as your 6th or your 5th gold, to add to a package of already very powerful golds might be good, especially in Arena where you won't be just running into decks of a specific faction. So in Arena, this is actually quite powerful now that I think about it, because in constructed, obviously, it only works if you're playing against a monster player. But in Arena, you will run into decks that most likely will have at least one, if not more, and obviously probably more than less monster units, right? So you will, if someone's picked a powerful monster unit or one that synergizes with something that they already have, obviously you can punish their strategy by playing this. So an Arena card, not a bad Arena card. And again, it has this cool art, so I hope it does see play in Arena. Alright, that is it. Those are the 10 cards. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you like the art? Do you not like the art? Do you think these will see play in Arena? Are these effective cards? Are some of them effective and constructed? Yeah, let me know. I'd love to hear your opinions.